Got my eyes straight ahead, got my head in the game. With the red light on, I'm just waiting for the change. Keep my head down low. Hi, Jay Fallon. Thanks for listening to The Slippery Slope. Hey, I was going through some of the comments and everything on my YouTube channel. I have noticed that a lot of comments these days get taken down. Weird things happen on my YouTube channel these days. All my views were way up. At one point, I was getting, had videos coming in at 40, 45, close to 50,000 views. Next minute, all my views have disappeared. No one's watching it these days. People make comments. I'll read the comments. I'll go back to have a look at the comments again. Comments are gone. Comments get taken down. Yeah, views come and go. I noticed the other day I had a video which was starting to get quite a few views. Then all the views disappeared. Then they started coming back again. Then they disappeared again. It's like, I don't know what's going on. If I was I'm not a cynical person at all. If I was, I would think maybe YouTube are stopping me from getting any success. Anyway, yeah, I'm saying all this because there was a couple of things that were commented on YouTube, and I wanted to answer them, and I've lost a lot of those comments. But one I do remember was someone asking me about my opinion on a former South Australian police officer. So I looked up the story, checked it out. I was reading it, thought, yeah, it is very interesting, actually, what's happened. It's got me thinking, but I reading through this story and another story which I'll go through. I'll read through it. I don't want to comment too much on the other story because I actually worked in the job from the beginning to the end. So I have to be, and I've said before, there's a lot of stuff I have to take down now with regards to Queensland Police. I had to take stories down, and I have to steer clear of doing stories on Queensland Police Service. Definitely cannot do anything on the wonderful, I won't say her name. Anyway, let's go through this story. Port Augusta police officer blames binge drinking for sexually assaulting 2 women. That's what the court hears. So this fella here, middle of the screen, if you can see him, Martin Dooku, he's out on bail. Former police officer, South Australia. What's the bet? Human Resources thought they were too busy looking at him thinking, yep, we need some more diversity. We need to pump our African police officers up. This is a good client. He'd be good on the books. Is that just me being cynical? Anyway, the lawyer for a former South Australian police officer who indecently assaulted 2 women has called for him to avoid prison, arguing that it would not be a safe place for her client. Well, golly gee, who would have thought that jail would not be a safe place for someone? The Adelaide Magistrates Court is preparing to sentence Martin Dooku, 24, who was found guilty of 3 counts of indecent assault while he was working on his first job based at the Port Augusta police station in 2019. The court heard Dooku sexually assaulted one of the victims while in a car at a secluded location, and on a separate occasion went to a victim's home uninvited late at night. Sounds very charming. Dooku's lawyer, Catherine Waite, asked Magistrate John Wells to suspend a client's sentence, saying that he would require protection in jail because there's been a recent alleged murder at Yadala Labor Prison. I'm not sure what she's talking about here. All ex-police officers get extra protection in jail. That's just the way it is. That's as far as I know, unless something's changed. She also goes on to say, not only is he young, but he's an ex-police officer who is a sexual offender now. Exactly, which is why he should be going to jail. And he also has mental health difficulties. Golly gee, it's funny that they only picked up the mental health difficulties after he sexually assaulted 3 different people. Now, with all of the psychometric evaluations that you do before you enter the police, isn't it strange that you would not have picked up that maybe he's got some mental health difficulties before? Like I said, I would be willing to bet that HR were too interested in getting a black African man in on the books more than they were about his mental mental issues or his mental ability to handle the job. Anyway, if Your Honour has seen, even from the alleged murder for the death in custody, it's just going about the safe place. Miss Waite told the court her client was caught up in what she described as the alcohol-fueled party culture while working in the regional city. Because, all those police that work in other areas where there's a bit of a party culture, like, Bondi in Sydney or the Gold Coast or Cairns, apparently everyone else is supposed to be able to handle it. But this poor fella in that booming party culture city in South Australia, yeah, okay, he couldn't handle it. He was emotionally immature, particularly when it came to his interpersonal relationships and romantic relationships, Ms. Waite said. Like I said, emotionally immature. And apparently South Australian police couldn't pick up on this beforehand. They were probably too interested in getting an African fellow on the books. It was a unique circumstance he was placed in. Yeah, let's keep going. Miss Waite told the court there was a culture of binge drinking amongst his peers. We're all socializing revolved around alcohol. And far be it. I mean, how, you could not expect Dooku to be able to stand up and say no. After all, he's only a police officer. He can't say no. It's not that strong-willed. There was a culture of binge drinking and what was described as marathon drinking sessions after 7-day rotations. Drinking for many hours after one has finished a night shift, she said. I bet you there was not this constant 7-day rotation and we all just get on the terps for long shifts, for long periods afterwards. I bet you that's a little, not even a little, I bet you it's very exaggerated. Just anyway, I won't say anymore. The court heard a medical expert diagnose Dooku as suffering from alcohol abuse disorder during his offending. Ms. Waite added Dooku was of Sudanese and Ugandan background. Is that part of the defense now? And he had experienced vicarious trauma, hearing stories of violence and war through family members and friends. Oh, my goodness. So, did you hear that? He's experienced vicarious trauma. So, he hasn't experienced any actual physical on-the-spot trauma where, he saw violence, he participated in war, he saw death, he had gruesome visions of violence and war because he was actually there, boots on the ground. He was actually living in Uganda or Sudan or wherever this went on. No. He just experienced it vicariously because he heard stories. My goodness. Next minute, he'll be saying that, imagine this. Next minute, you'll be saying, well, someone had experienced vicarious trauma because he watched a Marvel movie. That's the next defense that'll come out. The prosecutor, however, asked for an immediate term of imprisonment, given 2 of the 3 counts were serious examples of the offending. The victims were vulnerable by reason of their isolation. In each case, they offered verbal and physical resistance to the accused, and he repeatedly ignored that. Oh, my goodness. I feel sorry for the victims here, as always. And then this clown gets to stand up and say, well, I heard violent stories of the country where I came from, and there were some violent stories that I heard. That's my defense. And how can I be expected to say no when someone offers me a beer at the end of the shift? It's everyone else's fault. Speaking of everyone else's fault, I'm just going to read this. Like I said, I know a little too much about this. I'm not allowed to talk too much about, let's try to just stick to verbatim here. Cop who turned to supplying drugs after harassment at work avoids jail. So all Rachel Elise Perry ever wanted was to be a police officer. But when she realized her dream, she is subjected to sexual harassment, predatory behavior, and misogyny. If that's true, it's very bad, very sad. Harboring a well-founded fear that reporting harassment would damage her police career, Perry's mental health suffered. A well-founded fear. You read this and you think, wait, I'm not saying anything. Well, I will say this. I read that, and it's like they're talking about the QPS of the 1980s. It's not the QPS of the last 10 years or so, not really. Anyway, Let's go. Comments to myself. She had been accepted into the police academy age 19, graduating with distinction. By 25, she was in a downward spiral, supplying drugs, mostly cocaine, while a serving officer. Police raided her home after an investigation in Brisbane revealed Perry and her then partner were involved in the supply of drugs from February to April 2021. It is, in fact, serious offending. However, there are some unusual circumstances in this case. Brisbane District Court Judge Deborah Richards said, Perry became somewhat of a poster girl after graduating from the academy, used to promote female police recruitment, defence barrister Saul Holt said. So, okay. However, Perry was sexually harassed by a colleague at her first posting to Cairns. I'd love to see evidence of this sexual harassment. She was encouraged to report it by a male mentor in the force, but chose not to because she feared it would damage her career. So she feared it would damage her career. So a male mentor is telling her she should report it, but she fears it'll damage her career. Okay. A fear that, in my view, was well-founded, said Judge Richards, because Judge Richards had headed a 2022 domestic violence inquiry into Queensland Police, which revealed a culture of fear and silence. Do you think maybe Judge Richards has a bit of an axe to grind? Does it seem like maybe Judge Richards maybe isn't the best person to be on this case? Because maybe she's a little biased in her. Anyway, Richards also noted that one of Perry's references was from a police officer who talked about the lack of mental health care within the force. I will agree with that. There is a very definite lack of mental health care within the force. The service, sorry, not the force. Perry was again targeted when posted at remote communities. She was subjected to a sexual harassment and misogynistic behavior on a regular basis. Again, if that's true, it's disgusting. But you need to report these things. Anyway, the unwanted attention took a toll on her well-being, and her love for the job diminished, which was a shame because that's all she ever wanted to do. Perry did receive counselling in the force, but it was less than ideal, Richards noted. Perry returned to Brisbane, so she was still holding the scars of the sexual harassment and misogynistic behaviour. These scars led her back into Brisbane, into the arms of another man who was, says here, starting a relationship with a man she did not know was a drug user and who became quite controlling and violent towards her. She began using and supplying drugs, including a one-stage $1,700 of cocaine for an acquaintance. Among her string of offences, Perry was charged with accessing the police database on duty to conduct a private check for an associate, stealing 2 drug test kits, and possessing a handgun. Perry has since climbed yourself out of what was a pretty big ditch you dug yourself into, Richards said. Diagnosed with ADHD and anxiety, Perry has since undergone drug and alcohol courses as well as counselling. Perry, 27, pleaded guilty to a string of charges, including 12 counts of supplying drugs. It wasn't a one-off, 12 counts of supplying. You unfortunately lost the career. That was the one that you wanted all your life, and you won't get that back, Richard said. It's impressive, the efforts that you have made to turn your life around. Perry was on Tuesday sentenced to 2.5 years in jail and granted immediate parole because none of this is Perry's fault, okay? She was subjected to sexual harassment and misogynistic behavior on a regular basis. She never provided any evidence of this, but that's just what she said. And then she also got into a bad relationship with a man she didn't know was a drug user, and he was quite controlling and violent towards her. Oh, my goodness. What can I say about either of these stories? I'll stick to Dooku, the South Australian officer. because I think in some ways both stories are, you can see similarities in that neither of them seem to want to take responsibility. Neither of them could stand up and say, hey, you know what? I could have said no. I made some really stupid decisions. No, the defense that's put forward by both of them is that, you know, I couldn't say no. I couldn't make these smart decisions. I was having all these problems. It's everyone else's fault but mine. I mean, Dooku, for crying out loud, he heard stories, traumatic stories, of from friends and relatives about traumas and war in another country. And he has taken that upon himself, and that has affected him at work and caused him to want to sexually assault females. This inability of people to take responsibility for their own actions and stand up and say, you know what, maybe I was just a bit of a twat. I chose to do these things because I wanted to. I chose these things because I thought I could make some money out of it. I chose these things because I'm a sexual deviant. I chose this thing because of my sinful nature. I chose it. And I'm not going to point the finger at everyone else or at the circumstances and blame everything else, but stand up and say, I did this and it's my fault. This is the world we live in. No one takes responsibility for their own actions anymore. That's the, can I say that's the current generation? Is that wrong? Or is it just the world in general at the moment? No one takes responsibility for their own actions. That's my opinion. I'm not saying anything more about that QPS one. Thanks for listening to The Slippery Slope.
They just fuel the desire that will take me higher. I'm on fire because nothing's gonna